festival, Boryong Mud Festival. So we are now approaching the end. The third road, things to enjoy. There are a lot of festivals that I already mentioned. So finally, the fourth road, things to talk about, to make people interested in Korea, to attract them. While the three other roads are local roads, the fourth road is actually the highway, I think so, to Korea to become the it country. For example, 2002 World Cup, a lot of journalists who were assigned to Korea, they were disappointed because they wanted to go to Japan. But in fact, when World Cup happened, they were very happy because it was more exciting because of the Korean people's enthusiasm. Another occasion is approaching, which is G20 summit, scheduled next year. Korea will be chair country. We hope that it will have a similar impact like World Cup. It will be an opportunity to act like a leader in economic issues during global economic crisis. So, therefore, this is only when the four roads meet that we will be able to leave a lasting impression of Korea on the rest of the world. So in closing, I just want to quote Jean-Marie Le Gleziot, who is last year's Nobel Literature winner. He said, "Cultural competitiveness will develop Korea. Cultural image can determine the success of a Korean product. Korean products are undersold abroad because they lack a cultural image. When the central government, local autonomies, companies, and people come together and cooperate, the national brand can be promoted successfully." As the saying goes, seeing is believing. So we have to open the roads so that people can come Korea and see for themselves and become true believers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Choi, for those excellent ideas on how we should go about improving our nation brand. Having heard all those four excellent presentations, I think we have two discussions, and I think we have about 20 minutes left. So we will give them 5 minutes each, and hopefully we will get 10 minutes of interaction with the floor. We'll start with Mr. Lee Yoon.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And also I'd like to thank the Korea Foundation for organizing this important session and also inviting me as a discussant to this session. I think that the topic of today, this session, which is the nation branding, is a little difficult one, but I think it has been one of the very important and very fashionable and very attractive subjects. Certainly these days, I think, rather certainly. So I think the reason behind this is that we are very interested in to find out how to enhance our standing, our reputation, our image in the eyes of the international community, because we feel that Korea is underestimated compared with its achievements, and we feel that there is some gap between what we are and what we are seen by others. So I think in that sense, the discussion, the suggestions and various ideas and the perspectives presented by four presenters are very useful for us to formulate and also develop our policy and strategy on nation branding. So having said that, I'd like to share my observation on this issue, my personal observation on this issue. Firstly, I think nobody will deny that we need to make more contributions to international community if we are really serious about enhancing our reputation. I mean, the more ODAs, more PKO, and more involvement in international global issues. So, but I think that means we need to, that means more money and more resources and more headaches. So I think there is a problem here. I'm a little, I'm not so sure that whether the Korean people in general, they are willing to pay more taxes, and they are willing to share more burdens for the international cause. So I think when we deal with this nation branding, we also have to consider this domestic situation, not only the external factors, but also this domestic situation. It is very important to get the domestic support for increasing our roles, our contributions in international society. And secondly, I think we need to also think about the negative factors. As Professor Choi already pointed out, we tend to concentrate on the positive factors, but I think there are negative factors also, such as North Korean nuclear issue, and also divided country, and also our attitude, our unfriendly attitude toward foreign workers in Korea, for example, and also the image of early Koreans traveling abroad, something like that. So I think we have to think about very seriously how to control the damage, how to prevent those negative images from damaging our reputation abroad. And my third point is, I think, very cautiously, I'd like to say that we are a little hasty, and also we are a little ambitious. We want to get results, get returns too quickly, I think, in my opinion. So because what we are going to do is about the impacting and also changing the perception of others toward us, and also impacting the image, the minds of the people. So I think it'll take time, and also it'll take very continuous, very consistent effort on the part of on our part. So I think we need to take more long-term perspective rather than short-sightedness, and also we need to be patient rather than hasty. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General Lee. Professor Son.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Korea Foundation, and particularly Ambassador Im Sung-jun for inviting me to this very important session. I'm not familiar with the whole very holistic approaches to nation branding, like Dynamic Korea or something equivalent, but I just like to talk, confine myself, my discussion to the world of international cooperation, in other words, foreign policies and international relations, and how the brand works and what would be the utility there. If you think it that way in the context of international relations or foreign policy, it is an aspect of soft power. I don't really need to give definitions of soft power, because you already know that. And the branding is a soft power strategy because you don't use force or money to achieve something, but you use knowledge, as Mr. Anhold pointed out, that brand yourself, like Japan after the end of the World War II, they brand themselves as peace nation, whether that is attractive to the neighbors or United States, that's a question, but that's the way Japanese brand themselves. Also, you can brand others, like United States brand North Korea as, at one time, axis of evil. Now, and then that served American interest in global policies or Northeast Asian policies, and we might need equivalent or something new branding in order to deal with North Korea. So that's another aspect of branding others in international relations. In that sense, that's a source of power, very important dimensions of power. It's a knowledge power, identifying yourself and identifying others, partners. And also our panelists mentioned that branding is what you create, but in the end, what is created by others. Because the effectiveness of a branding depends on what others think that that particular brand is attractive to themselves, not to the countries that create. So we see that in the branding attempts, for example, Japan during the mid 2000, they created Japan Branding Committee under the auspice of Prime Minister's office, and various attempts. And often that reflects domestic interest and domestic concerns. Then the branding and the branding power is incidental to soft power, what others think, what foreigners think. Once you did it in the Prime Minister's office, and the next thing you see is that the industries, firms flock to the individual industries and ask for support. And then there's a bureaucratic fights and bureaucratic competitions for promoting, let's say, manga, anime, fashion, Japanese food, etc. And those competitions and progress, developments are incidental to foreign taste. What foreigners think that this is your brand or this is really attractive. So we have to avoid that dimension. Whenever governments deeply involved in branding affairs, branding tasks, so we need to strike a balance between what you like, what you want to create, and what others think that is attractive. And I know this is a very important but very difficult jobs, and that's why I think some of our panelists are quite pessimistic pessimistic of sort of systematic attempts to create brands as a whole. But nonetheless, I think if you think about branding in the field of international relations, I have several points to share with you. One is, of course, in this field, there's no common standardized way to create or promote national brand. Good example is 10 years ago, Moody's and S&P's. They set up, they had sovereign ratings and they rated individual countries. And then countries had to meet their standards in order to, receive better ratings, and so, they get better financing in the world, in the capital market. But in the worlds of international relations, you don't really need to do that because the overall sovereign rating doesn't really much in very specific policy situations. Precisely because this branding and soft power is relational, that brand is received differently according to other people, not just the people within the nation, but branding, one brand is attractive to country A but not attractive to country B. So it is more bilateral or small group interaction rather than it's like your global brand, your global attractiveness. You got 70% of soft power in the world. That doesn't mean that that power translate into specific bilateral relations. So in that sense, with support from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, particularly Director Lee sitting over there, we did a survey among foreign ministry officials that evaluate for Korea's soft power diplomacy. And one question is that which areas, which regions or colleges, countries do you think that soft power diplomacy work best? And you receive very different results. And number one is Southeast and Central Asia. 2 is Africa and Middle East. And distant third is Northeast Asia. If you are engaged with Hanyu, all these things, then how you started in China and Japan, so you would pick Northeast Asia, but the foreign ministry officials have different ideas. So that's one aspect. And second, and what would be the resources that Korea has in doing diplomacy? And they have very different opinions and well-trained human resources, Korean pop cultures, economic development, or things like that. So we need a very careful and comprehensive research that, for example, if you want to achieve certain policy outcomes, then you can map the world and group the countries in accordance with what they like, what they want from Korea, and what you like in that region, and then what resources you can mobilize. It's like that. And in the end, you don't, doing these jobs, and you probably need multiple brands. It's not single brands that apply to the whole world. You have you have to find multiple brands, create multiple brands, and then use that brands to achieve certain policy goals. I have to stop. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Son. I think none of the panelists was pessimistic. I think maybe some of them were less optimistic, I guess. If we take a couple of comments or questions, I think we will bite into 5 minutes of the coffee break. So if that's fine with you, yes, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is An Chung-young, a professor at JoongAng University, and I'm also serving as a foreign investment ombudsman at KOCHRAB. Well, perhaps as layman, I would like to really concur with this Mr. Simon Arnold's points, working on the integrity first and then natural image follows naturally. And also Professor Nicholas Kerr's point, international broadcasting is very important, and also Professor Choi's effective delivery system. Combining these 3 points, I really would like to point out that the critical role played by international powerful news media like the BBC, CNN, and the New York Times, and then the Financial Times. Sometimes those international news medias, as far as I'm concerned, plays very important role in shaping up a country's image to the rest of the world. But unfortunately, those medias sometimes treat news items on the false and distorted data and sometimes blowing up out of proportion. And maybe, those medias also playing out of international power politics and sometimes reflecting national interest. So my question is that how can we approach those powerful international news media? And do you believe in that those medias, they're certainly operating their own principles and company guidelines, but their philosophy and guidelines are consistent with the integrity, you just raised, and those media dominate actually the global, the news media market. So as, middle power Korea, how we, handle all those, international powerful media issues. For example, this SsangYong motor company suffered a great deal of the very militant labor strike, and about a week ago, CNN covered that the full story, almost, I believe, about 30 seconds or something like that. That really ruined Korea's image as a foreign investors' destination. But that is just one piecemeal case of the Korea's, labor union activities. So I would like to hear your views on these points.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Han. We will get back to the panelists in the end, please.
When we consider those two consecutive sessions that we've had on this topic of national brand, which I both attended, this has been a tremendously useful, highly informative discussion, and I'd like to congratulate the organizer, which I think is the Korea Foundation, for this very excellent organization of this discussion. And I was particularly impressed by what I've heard from Dr. Anholt and Professor Kull on their emphasis on the need or the importance of integrity. We often hear in the press, and I think also heard this expression in the previous session from some of the Korean participants, that we should do this or that in order to improve a brand. We should increase overseas development assistance to improve our national brand. But I think that is really giving a wrong reason and could be misleading the public. I think the right reason could be something like this. We have benefit a great deal. We owe our prosperity to the aid that we received from the advanced developed countries, and it's about time that we should be paying back. Or even better still, we could be saying that this is for the benefit of our foreign participants. I think all of us were brought up in primary school days. We are told that the founding ideology, value, when our the founding ancestor Tangun created our nation, was for us to become 홍익인간, human beings who does useful things for others. I think that should really be the right cause of our interest in so-called national brand. So this makes me, and I've been feeling somewhat uncomfortable with the name Presidential Council, a national brand, because this immediately leads us to think about how to improve brand or brand index, which I think is probably quite a misleading approach to the subject matter. But still, I think it is not so clear as to what is the direction of activities being contemplated by that Presidential Council. Is it going to focus on external propaganda? And we now think that it better not. But then we could instead focus on internal or domestic soul-searching or public education for the purpose of changing our value or improving our behavior. So here is one direction in which the Presidential Council may want to operate. But then I think the genesis of the council was our concern with the so-called Korea discount, which was mentioned by Mr. Kull. Then I think this takes us to the area which Mr. Kull referred to as public diplomacy. And maybe that council better be renamed as Presidential Council on Public Diplomacy, which I think essentially covers many of the things that the council is presently interested in.
I'm sorry, but I just got a memo from the organizer that our time is up here.
Let me just, 30 seconds. We talk about effect of Daejanggeum. Let me tell you this story. So Chinese people, having seen the Daejanggeum, developed a taste and interest in Korean food. So there was a surge of Chinese tourists to Korea. They were here, and they got disappointed with what they had. And Korean restaurants. So many of them returned home disappointed. I don't know whether this is a fable or a true story, but I think there is something to think about.
I will give Ambassador Chua and Mr. Arnold 1 minute each.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah. In fact, I would like to seek a clarification from Mr. Anhol. Well, we have heard about methodologies and marketing. I think we had a very comprehensive presentation and discussion on that. But I'm more intrigued by what Mr. Anho focused on, which was on the fundamentals of brands. But there's one suggestion he said which intrigued me. I found a bit puzzling, I must admit, because he said if you want to, one question countries have to ask themselves is, what is the country for, right? What is the genius of that particular country? So if Korea wants to do something about its brand, then it's got to ask itself, what is Korea for, and what is the genius of Korea? I'm not sure I know what Mr. Anho means by that. Perhaps he can use the example of other countries that, let's assume, have arrived, countries like France, Japan, UK, and US, to illustrate what you mean. I mean, what is the genius of Japan, for example? What does Great Britain or France, what do they stand for? Thank you.
Simon, 1 minute.
Okay, firstly, the question about the media. The media are, generally speaking, in the business of reflecting public opinion, not creating it. 99% of all the media in the world simply do that. The media and public opinion deal in nation brand. They deal in national images. That's the currency that they work with. So yes, it is absolutely vital to understand how they work and what makes them tick. Leading into your next point, and several other people have raised this very issue, the trouble is that the media are only going to start purveying to their readership a different story if it's better than the one they've already got. And better doesn't necessarily mean better for Korea. So if Korea has, no, I won't talk about Korea. I'll talk about Romania, okay? Romania has a very powerfully negative image. Every time, because it's associated with Ceausescu, with dictatorship, with vampires, with pornography rings, everything bad is associated with Romania. It's a kind of rubbish basket for all the worst stories in the media in Europe. Every time I go to Romania, they say to me, how can we make the media tell different stories about Romania? Because Romania is a very good, successful country these days. The reality is, public opinion and the media will never voluntarily upgrade from a juicy negative story to a boring positive one. And the thing which concerns me mainly about everything I've heard today is that it's all very good, but it's also very boring. And the ways in which you appear to want to present Korea to the world, I could take Korea from the bottom of that page and substitute almost any other country, and it would be identical. You want to be perceived as being good partners, as being awfully nice and helping the poor. You want to be perceived as a technological miracle country. You want to be perceived as good neighbors. You want to be perceived as saving the planet, and so on and so on and so on. Why would a journalist want to write stories like that? They're patently false, patently boring, patently self-congratulatory, and patently of no interest whatsoever to their readership. Until you can provide the media with a story that's more exciting than the one that they're already telling, they will not change their story, and that's the bottom line. The question about what's Korea for? Well, the countries that are famous, they haven't done this deliberately, it's happened to them. So these are not very good stories, but they are stories, and they exist, and they're part of the reason that these countries are famous. So if you say to people, what's Japan for? They'll say it's about technology, it's about miniaturization, it's about good design and value for money. That's people's primary association with Japan. Not their culture, not their history, not even necessarily the cuisine, but their products.
because that's the salient point as far as most people are concerned. In a way, it doesn't matter that that's a tremendous and unjust reduction of what Japan is all about. The point is that it means that Japan is respected. And therefore, whatever else Japan does in almost any other area is automatically associated with a premium. America, it's difficult to summarize because it's got such an enormous image, which has been created in so many areas. People often say to me, how come America is number 11 in your nation brands index? That's so low. Well, I say to myself, God, that's so high. How come America isn't number 39? You look at the way that people talk about it around the world these days. It's precisely because it's got such a rich, complex image that even one silly little thing like invading Iraq can't destroy it. And that really is the ultimate benefit for having a strong image. It is an insurance policy against the bad stuff that sometimes happens, and in foreign policy, the bad stuff you sometimes have to do. The more people know about you, the better they understand you, the more complex associations they have about your culture, your history, your people, your industries, the more likely your good name is to survive if things go wrong.
Thank you. One real last minute for Nicholas Kerr.
Well, I wanted to reply to what Li Jun said about what do you do about your what do you do when your population doesn't want to be a good neighbor? What do you do when your population doesn't want to divert resources to international aid? Well, I think this is where you have leadership. And in any situation like this, if you've got a brand, the key thing is to live the brand and find, and I think that domestic communication and domestic inclusion is probably the most important element in international communication, being what you wish to be and helping facilitate, leading your population so that they do the right things. And it's a very hard thing to do. It's a very hard thing to do. But if you have one or two people can mess up the entire image of a country. Look at the way in which America had a brand that everybody knows of justice, rule of law, and a few crazy people, some of them small sergeants in Abu Ghraib, some of them political people, destroyed that for the world and for many people, for many imaginations around the world. So living the brand, if you want to put it in those terms, leading to people towards conforming to these objectives is ever so important. Thank you.
Simon Arnold wants to have the last word. 30 seconds.
This is because I can't bear to let Nick have the last word. Something we really haven't mentioned and we really should, and Nick just reminded me of it, the importance, the absolute importance in all of these discussions of civil society. The difference between a can of beans and a country is that when you're marketing a country, well, when you're marketing a can of beans, you don't have to ask the beans before you decide what you put on the label. When you're marketing a country, you do have to ask the beans. The beans are the owners of the image of Korea. It belongs to the population of Korea. It is their birthright. These issues they're too important to be decided by government. They're too important to be decided by industry. They're